Bios. Our first speaker is Horst Stipp. Horst is EVP of Global Business Strategy of the Advertising Research Foundation. Horst.
Glad to be here. I don't have slides, excuse me. This session is going to be about business and money, except for my talk, which is a little bit off that topic. And the reason is that I believe that the foundation for all these discussions should be insights on consumer research. And if you don't know the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation, of course, as the name says, is focused on research on the impact of advertising. Part of that, of course, also is research on consumer behavior, how consumers use the media. And before that, I spent a good deal of my life at NBC. The last 15 years or so, my main topic at NBC was to try to figure out the future of television, the future of media use. Or as some of my colleagues would call it, they said, well, Horst's project is to find out if we're still going to have a job in 5 years. So from that perspective, I like to make the argument that understanding consumers really is the foundation, and that is much easier said than done. The one thing that fascinated me in my work over these years was just how bad predictions about media use were, and how very, very smart people got it very, very wrong. All starting with Being Digital, I think 1995, by Negroponte, you know, all these smart people at MIT, and going forward. So I spent a lot of time thinking about why that would be, why it would be so difficult to predict the future, and so I like to just say a few words about that. My perspective is the following. To start with the obvious, change, of course, in media use, in society, in how people use technology, and especially in the development of technology, is faster than ever, more and more complex, which of course makes it much, much harder to predict accurately how this is all going to develop and turn out at a time where, because of all those rapid changes, forecasting things becomes more important and more urgent than ever. So there's this huge demand for accurate forecasts, for forecasting. And from my perspective, what I find is that I think that consumer research is often not really regarded very, very highly in that context, and most importantly, very, very often it is not very good. And we got an illustration of that when I got up this morning. I turned on the news, and well, Scotland voted 55 to 45, and all the polls had said it was going to be close. And I had a conversation with a polling expert saying to me yesterday, Horst, do you know how crummy these polls are? I don't believe this. So it's not just in the media, it's just all over. And I think that apart from the bad quality of a lot of research, there are also a couple of biases that I think we should be aware of that we often forget about. I think in this culture, especially in business, technology and change and innovation is rated very, very highly, and the spotlight very often is on that what is changing, because it is just more interesting to report the death of something than that people still read books or still read magazines and still watch television. Secondly, a lot of the reporting is done by people who are not trained in analyzing research critically, and I would also argue that when reporters give new Apple products standing ovations, that their reports may not be as accurate as we would like to have them. I think there are quite a number of examples that I can give you here that describe some of the assumptions, questionable assumptions, the bad data that are out there, data from reports published and widely repeated all over the world. I remember one report from a couple of years ago that claimed that more TV shows were now watched online than on television. Complete nonsense. I think that all reporters are in total agreement that there's an enormous amount of cord cutting, and that the reason for cord cutting is that people are abandoning the old ways of transmission in order to watch online, and they don't need this anymore. simply not true. If you do a complete analysis, you will find that the number one reason for cord cutting is that people don't have the money to pay for cable. It is driven by economics. So there was a lot of cord cutting during the recession for that reason, and even more reducing cable bills rather than actually cutting the cord. Those are all facts and analyses that are available if you dig deep and if you analyze the data critically. So I could go on and on. There are tons of examples. One would be, for example, it was alluded to earlier, about user-generated content. Well, the number one category on YouTube is music videos, what MTV used to be. It is not user-generated content. So that's just another element that I think is a fact that we need to be aware of. So here's my bias, accusing other people of biases, just to lay this out. So I believe that we really need to pay attention to the quality of consumer research, what is accurate, what do we really know, and as a researcher, let me emphasize this again, there is a lot of bad research out there. You got to look at this stuff really, really carefully. And I think in order to predict the future, in order to address all these important issues that are on the agenda today, we've got to start out with accurate data. I think that is really, really important. So thank you, and have I given a minute to the next?
I would only comment on about the data. It's hard. It's really hard. We're going to go, the WebEx is not working, so we will in fact go to Ben Swinburne from Morgan Stanley. We have time to take a question while we're getting set up. Any question for Horst just while we're getting set up here? Technology? It's hard.
Well, why don't we wait and then just give credit to John Carey, who did a lot of work with us while I was at NBC and some of the insights. Oh, I just want to give a shout out to John Carey, who most of you heard at the previous panel with all these beautiful images. We did a lot of work. We worked together at NBC, and I think that thoughtful, what he called media ethnography, was one of the things that really helped us at NBC to figure this out and do good research. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Okay. Good morning. I'm a equity research analyst at Morgan Stanley, so I've never had such a flattering introduction of research precede me as I just did. We approach the world from an investment perspective. My job at Morgan Stanley, just to give you the background and context, is to advise our clients on investing in media, cable, satellite, advertising companies. So we spend a lot of time looking at really current trends and how we think it's moving profits around the ecosystem. So given that we cover about almost 30 stocks in the content distribution space, we tend to focus a lot on sort of the battle between content and distribution. So these are the 6 things I'm going to touch on at a very high level here in my short presentation. The first is on the fact that we're moving to an all on-demand world over time. I would agree with the prior speaker that this is slow. I think roughly, if you look at the Nielsen data between DVR playback and video on demand and streaming, maybe 20% of total TV consumption now is happening on a time-shifted basis, but that is growing double digits. Over half of American households have DVRs in their homes now, and video on demand is probably in 75–80% of all TV households. Cord nevers, we spent some time trying to figure out how big of a population the cord nevers are and why they're cord nevers. I think the research and survey work we've done suggests it's primarily economics. Most of the people in my office under the age of 25 don't have cable, and they wear it as a badge of pride because they've figured out how to either use somebody else's password or hook up some Apple box, and it's really lame if you have cable. So there's a combination of being lame and being expensive that's working against them. But I actually think the industry is trying to address some of this. We spend a lot of time, we do cover Netflix, thinking about the issue of incumbents and how profitable they are. And I'm excited to listen to Verizon speak in a little bit as one of those incumbents, and how they deal with new entrants such as Facebook and others who either can have a tolerance for appetite, a tolerance for big investment cycles, or taking losses in the near term, and of course Netflix. One of the big question marks overhanging the industry is advertising. Online video represents really a major change in the advertising ecosystem in the television world, because it's really new inventory. The beauty, to some extent, of television advertising, the reason it continues to grow while other traditional platforms have eroded, is because it's a fixed supply of eyeballs. You really haven't had an internet version of display advertising come into place. It's just going to massively flood the market with new ad supply. And online video has the potential, and certainly if Facebook were to turn their display ads into video ads, of massively increasing the amount of online video advertising available for advertisers, which of course is negative for pricing. Content costs and bandwidth issues, and I know Blair will probably touch on some of that as well later, and then the policy backdrop and net neutrality. So let me move through this quickly. This is just a flow chart we use to try to think about the future of television. We think that barriers to entry are coming down. Sony, Google, Amazon, others represent both revenue and cost opportunities and threats respectively to existing players. You have the frenemy factor. Google, Facebook, Apple, Netflix are both buyers of content, but also competitors for consumer time and money. It is a great time to be in the content business. Content truly is king, queen, whatever adjective you want to use. But you got to be really clear about what you're talking about. Really, when we talk about content, we're talking about sports leagues, we're talking about talent. A lot of media companies are really more distributors than actual content creators. And if you are a distributor, which is in the salmon pink here, you're really facing new competition, and margins, I think, will go down over time. And we think the consumer also is a winner from all this competition. Just to put some of this in perspective, Netflix, we have our estimates of them reaching about 55 million US subscribers. That's roughly half of all US broadband homes by 2020. And if you look at the growth they've had recently, including 2014, this looks like it could be conservative. Globally, and this was touched on in the last panel a bit, the appetite for content continues to grow. What's been incredible over the last 5 years is all of these new devices and screens have not reduced or cannibalized much in the way of consumption or spending. This is Price Waterhouse data globally, looking across different markets. And outside the US, it's exploding. The rise of the middle class in a lot of markets has actually led to more money being spent on things like entertainment, which is very good if you're a content creator. US as well, what we're seeing is both, and this is Verona Schuler data, both the amount of money spent per person annually on entertainment is growing, and it's growing as a percent of spend. Now up to 50% of total entertainment spending is on cable, satellite television, and other pieces of entertainment. One way to think about new entrants like Netflix is sort of cable without the CapEx. So when we think about where margins can go long term for Netflix, we think about them moving beyond the satellite and cable companies because they do not have a physical infrastructure to maintain, but at the same time not being as profitable as the HBOs, MTVs of the world, because they're not wholesale businesses. They have to market, they have to do customer service. So they have a different model from a cost structure perspective. If you dive into their cost structure, you can see they spend 80% of their P&L on content, whereas Comcast, DirecTV spend somewhere between 30 to 50%. Just in absolute dollars, in the US alone, Netflix, which launched their streaming business in 2007, is now spending more money than HBO on content. Globally, they're up to $3 billion, and our forecast by 2018 is $7 to $8 billion of content. I sort of joke with them that I can't even think of what you could spend $7 to $8 billion on before you start really running out of ideas. but they're certainly working on it hard. On the cord never front, we think, this is on the right axis, there's somewhere around 9 to 10 million households in the United States that have broadband and don't have pay TV. That is certainly growing. It obviously skews much younger. On the cord cutting front, 2013, Morgan Stanley estimates, was the first year we saw a decline in pay TV ads, pay TV subscribers in the United States. Even during the financial crisis, the numbers were basically flat, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. However, I would actually tell you, here we are sitting 6 months into 2014, we've seen actually a big improvement in pay TV trends. So if the cord cutting is happening, it doesn't appear to be accelerating at all. In fact, it seems to be abating a bit. And I think part of this is there's a big focus by the incumbents to actually address that more price-sensitive customer. One example of that is Dish's soon-to-be-launched over-the-top service. They're cobbling together a cheap, low-end, over-the-top, single-stream video service that's going to be kind of like a cable light package aimed at that more price-sensitive, more tech-savvy consumer. We've looked in this analysis at what kind of margin they can make based on what programming they might include. And basically, if they include all that's in expanded basic, they're not going to make any money at a $30 price point. The real trick, if they can pull it off, and it's an if, is carving out sports. Sports is an increasingly growing piece of the content cost piece of US pay TV and global pay TV. And unlike in Europe, where sports tends to be sold on a premium basis, a la carte, it's all bundled in. So whether you watch the Yankees or not, you're paying for the S network at a $4 to $5 per month clip. You add up, in a market like New York, sports probably represents almost $15 to $20 of your content bill out of a total $40, $50 number. So sports is really the issue. It's also which is giving incumbents a lot of pricing power. On that front, gross margins for MVPDs, which are multi-channel video providers, cable, satellite, telcos, are declining. Their content costs are growing at a double-digit clip annually, and there's no way for them to pass it on to the consumer. Fortunately, they have the broadband business to offset some of this. The satellite operators do not. And you can see on the right, programming costs as a percent of revenue is accelerating and going up in the wrong direction for those companies. But it's not just limited to the distributors, physical distributors of content. The networks are also massively increasing their investment in programming. Netflix, you can see the numbers are huge, but even if you look at Discovery, Scripps, AMC Networks, Stars, anywhere from 15 to 25% CAGR in their growth in content cost investment. And so this is now happening across the board. More money piling into content investment. If you actually can keep up with what's on TV, everyone would be impressed. On the advertising side, cable networks went from, in 1980, virtually nothing. ESPN launched in 1979. Now they are the majority of TV advertising in the United States. And there's a chance online video does to cable and broadcast what cable did to broadcast over the last 30 years. And then lastly, on a bandwidth policy perspective, one thing to keep in mind, if you were to cancel cable and watch the same amount of television in high def over the internet, we estimate it to be about 20 times more bandwidth consumed in that home than the median average today. You'd be about 500 gigabytes a month of consumption, well above any cap that's out there from Comcast and others. So people talk about moving to an over-the-top only environment, but it has massive bandwidth implications for the network. More and more spectrum is being allocated in the cable plant to broadband as a result of this. And of course, there's all the focus on Title II, the fact that the 96 Act is completely obsolete, but no one seems to have the political will to create a new one. And I personally am skeptical that this massive fear of the cable and telcos using variable rate pricing or usage-based pricing is going to ultimately be implemented anytime soon in a way to crush Netflix usage and other things. I think that's actually the wrong conclusion. These companies make a fortune on broadband. There'd be really asymmetric risk to messing around with the pricing model and attracting the ire of regulators along those lines. So I'll stop there.
Our next speaker is Raul Katz from CITI in Columbia.
Thank you. So here's the point. Relative to the first speaker, I'm doing predictions, so I might be wrong, and maybe my data is pretty bad, but this is what I have. Sometimes I have only 2 data points, and I'm drawing a line across the 2 data points. Relative to the second speaker, he's very high on Netflix, and I might be inclined to short the stock. So this could be a very interesting panel because we're having like quite a bit of differences. But what prompted this presentation was a phrase in the introduction of the session that was written in the agenda that said, what are the factors that explain the high market shares, respectively, of Netflix, Google, YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and the like? And I thought that sort of like intrigued me, and that's why I started looking at this and see whether we could draw some inferences about the way shares were evolving. So what I'm going to focus on is what is driving market share, particularly in the players that was mentioned before. Understand the different measures, tease out competitive strategies, and see whether we can relate share to strategy. Understand what the zones of contention are among the players. Where are they collapsing or battling? And outline a potential future scenario of industry development. Again, all these as a way of creating a strawman for discussion among the panelists and the audience. So we start by sizing the market, and essentially what we see is that, you know, this new way of buying TV on a streaming basis is diffusing as a complement of traditional TV subscription. So consistent with what Katz and Lazarsfeld found out in the 30s and 40s, this is still going on. In fact, if you look at the line, 38% of households buy traditional video distribution and Netflix and Amazon Video on Demand and the like. And so there is somewhat of a complementarity going on. But then when we start looking at market shares, and these are market shares of services that are being paid. So I took Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and unfortunately, there is already 2014 data, but one has to pay for it, so I couldn't make it. But what you see on the left is that Netflix share, and this is North America, so it's Canada and the United States, and it's survey. Let me cancel this. Oops. There. So Netflix is declining, Amazon is growing, and that's the most relevant trend. The interesting thing is those of us that started looking at wireless market shares, you know, we were sort of surprised of these kind of trends that are appearing every 6 months. I mean, you know, market shares in the wireless industry evolve very slowly because you have the contracts and you have net adds, and there's a lot of inertia. Here it's somewhat dramatic. I mean, obviously I would like to see the 2014 data, but something is going on the paid side. So what is Amazon doing that is driving the growth? And if you look at Amazon over time, essentially what you have is Amazon, they have a diversification strategy, and they started with books online. They moved into music and merchandise horizontally, and then they started moving on the platform, developing the two-sided market with marketplaces and leveraging their capabilities to get into web services. This is the whole different line of business in a way, leveraging the scale. On the other hand, sort of as a natural extension of DVD selling, they moved into streaming and finally into Amazon Studios. The same reason why Netflix is doing it, because you have to gain more bargaining power in dealing with those that are providing you with the content. Is the threat of forward and backward integration. But so that's the way these guys are moving. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at their business model and you try to tease out, look at Amazon Kindle. Look at the margins. Basically, they started selling at $199. The manufacturing cost by iSupply, the teardown, says it's $200. So they're losing money on the Kindle Fire. And obviously compare that to the iPad, where Apple is making 50% margin on the tablets in general. So these guys have a business model that says, I don't care whether I lose money on the device. What I'm trying to do is push merchandise, push content across the channel. And if you look at the analysis of the revenue and cost model, just drawing some sort of a baseline case of the income statement, this thing would appear to be working because they start sort of triggering more money on music, movies, ebooks, and obviously the e-commerce, and that amply compensates the losses that are having on the device. So far, we know that these guys, that's their play. Well, they're growing because they are giving it for free, the device, and they're using the device to sort of cross-subsidizing the device in order to gain on the other side. But then what happens to the guys that are selling it for free, selling next generation video for free? And this is market share of downstream traffic. So now we don't know surveys. We have just like the traffic on the data. And we see that YouTube suddenly comes up as being the dominant growth entity there. Well, what is YouTube in terms? Well, YouTube has 15,000 movies, some of them legally, some of them illegally. You know, when they spot an illegal download, they take it down, but it takes them some time. A lot of crappy movies, a lot of B movies. There are applications right now that come up and enable you to do the filtering, do the social, full movies on YouTube, $0 movies, ways of interacting with the platform that allow you to do what Netflix does on an integrated basis. Most is for free, but some are paid. But the way their business model on the YouTube, the revenue model, is on the advertising. It's pretty much a similar case to the classical Google case. So they're, again, subsidizing the content in order to get it on the advertising side, typical two-sided marketplace. And we haven't even counted Apple in the picture, because Apple sold 10 million Apple TV units in the last year with margins that one could say that they're giving it away, essentially. At $99, they are losing money, or not losing money, but not making a lot relative to their core business. And on the content side, nothing to be very happy about. They're not being very aggressive on dealing with the content providers in trying to extract rents, but the big disruption could come on the device side. That they are coming with next generation devices that are going to do much more than what we are accustomed to in terms of set-top boxes, in terms of the ability to deal with the content. So that's the way they're going to come in the whole field. So what do we have here? Let's step back now. We have here a situation where we have a digital ecosystem where, in fact, we have 4 big players that are fighting. And what are they fighting for? Well, they're fighting for the advertising revenues. They're fighting for the $184 billion advertising market in North America, $184 billion. And where does video come into the picture? My argument is that, and I could talk a lot about this, but my argument is that video is in fact a subsidized pawn. Is a subsidized pawn of large players in their battle for dominance in the advertising market. That they are saying, you could argue with me, well, video today is $140 billion in the United States. Yeah, but look at music. Music is $6 billion in US and Canada, when it used to be 50. And obviously we listen 3 times more music today than we did before. So they're discounting video. And they're saying, well, I'm going to use video on a subsidized basis in order to see whether I can capture a larger share of that advertising market on the mobile side or on the fixed side. So where is Netflix in this whole picture? Netflix is a small player. They cannot compare from a revenue side or an EBITDA to the others. They don't have the buying power. And so in that context, I believe they could rapidly fade. Having been the innovator, having changed the format of video distribution, they fulfill their creative destruction, and over time, they're going to disappear. Listen, granted, I'm being sharp on the statement in order to have a good give and take. But I'm saying, these are a pure player. Look at this score. A pure player. They could have difficulty mounting a sustainable strategy. They don't have the other businesses that the other 4 players have. Multi-homing costs are low, meaning that the percent of households that are both on Netflix and Amazon VOD is growing. So that means that the barriers to entry are low, coincidentally with what was said before. Piracy is increasing. You have popcorn time that is actually enabling a lot of privacy very easily. So that affects primarily the pure plays. The other players are more endowed. People are subsidizing, the large ones, they are subsidizing video. So, and this is not the first time we've seen this movie. In fact, if you look at Dropbox, for instance, Dropbox played pretty much the same role in the online storage backup. I mean, they're still alive, and they are thriving, and they're expanding in the market, but nevertheless, Google is there, and Microsoft is there, and slowly but surely, they're going to take down Dropbox. In a way, and this is a sideline, Netflix expansion strategy, in my sense, is a way of compensating for the threats that they perceive in the United States. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Terry Denson from Verizon.
So good morning, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. The way that I approach, typically speaking, in this environment is kind of just sort of think aloud and talk about how I really am approaching my job. So I'm responsible for content strategy and acquisition at Verizon across all the Verizon platforms and all the content categories, whether it's video, gaming, music, and much of what we've heard today, I think I agree with in terms of some of the fundamental premises. I had notes here that were typed, and then I sort of said, you know what, I don't know if that's any good. I like this better based upon what these guys have said. So but I will sort of weave in and out of how I approach the marketplace and give you an idea as to what we're thinking at Verizon. And so a lot of this will be come off as proof of concept from a practitioner's point of view. We're in it to make money. I think we sort of started this panel off as this being sort of the money business part of it, and that is really that's my primary responsibility. So when we're looking at video distribution, obviously I think most of you would be aware that Verizon about a decade ago invested $20 billion in a fiber to the home position, and it came under tremendous scrutiny at the time. I think we've proven over time that not only could we launch and create a tremendous service, but we could actually create profitability around that service. So what's happening in terms of the whole ecosystem of the space and the way that I evaluate it? Well, here's how I see it, is that there's much talk about cord cutting, and the way that I see that world is that it's really about marketplace opportunities. How long will there continue to be a meaningful traditional wireline multi-channel opportunity in the marketplace? 100 million households, 100 million plus households. Well, that's going to be there for a long time. I think if you look 10 years out, the penetration of multi-channel households certainly will decrease, but you'll still have a meaningful market. So we're not going to run away from that market. We believe that there are ways to win in that market. Growth markets. Well, OTT is a growth market, of course. And what does OTT mean? And that's where I probably spend the most of my time trying to determine where should we play in that particular space. Now, I think the point's been made. It's certainly a low barrier to entry, and that's going to create a crowded space. So if we're going to participate, we being Verizon, in that particular area, and we know it's going to be crowded, we have to be in a position where we can try our best to define what's a winner, what's a loser, and who's the competitive set. Here's some of the challenges that I think that we face. The metrics of success are diverse, and that creates a tremendous challenge for us. What is the motivation for one player in the marketplace? That motivation may be rational to them, irrational to us. So then we look and say, is this a rational market or irrational market? Well, the answer is it's both. It all depends on who you're talking to. I think the entities are going to play to their strengths, whether you are CE, the consoles, devices, network, content players. There are plenty of positions of strength in this particular field, and they all can be potential winners. And so how would you define winning in this space? I define the win in the space as who actually wins the customer relationship. So over the long term, you're going to be in a position where today, for instance, Netflix has a tremendous position with a customer relationship. Apple has a tremendous position with a customer relationship. Verizon Wireless has a tremendous position with a customer relationship. Facebook has a tremendous position with a customer relationship. We all have strengths with respect to customer relations. However, if we're going to participate in this new sector, this burgeoning sector, then how are we going to win in the customer relationship? Because there's only going to be, maybe, it's a crowded space today, and will continue to be a crowded space, I think, over the 2 to 3 year time horizon, but I think we'll start to wean out losers and winners over the next 5 years. So what do you have to do to win the customer relationship? One, I think you have to acknowledge and understand that at this point, consumers have moved to a real cost rationalization model, which is different than a sort of access model. Historically, customers have been real happy to spend a whole lot of money, buffet style. Americans like buffet, less so now than they used to, and likewise, less so the big all-you-can-eat access of multi-channel video. So you need to be in a position where you understand that the selective consideration for the consumer is really based upon delivering either A, what they perceive that they want, or B, something that has come to them through a authentic point of view, which social media I think is a good example there. When you deliver what they perceive that they want from a cost rationalization position, then the customers will spend they're willing to commit consideration. The way I see it is there's two types of consideration in this space today. And one is spending time to find what you want at no cost. And consumers more so today than before, and they'll continue, I think, to go along this path. They'll walk 3 blocks for free Wi-Fi. They will spend 20 minutes to find their content for free versus pay. Unless, of course, there's content that they really want on a selective basis, and then they will pay for it. So we need to identify that position as well. So the content positions, because at Verizon, we're aggregators. In a content position, what do you need to do from a content position to win in the space and win the consumers? Well, the content's got to be authentic. And it's either brand position, social recommendation, or recommendations from a recommendation engine from a winning entity. Today, Netflix is winning. Their recommendation algorithm seems to be successful, but it's only successful because they are a winning position. We believe that over the course of time, that if you are the organization that's winning, you need to have an effective recommendation engine, but it need not be the best recommendation engine. It just needs to connect with that particular consumer. The last point here, I think, is business models. So as the business models continue to diversify, over the top, direct to consumer, free, a la carte access, purchase, ownership, digital video, ad support, I think in those particular areas, a winning position will deliver. You don't have to deliver on all 5 or 6 of those, but I think you have to deliver in a majority of those. So I think as I come to a close here, on the Verizon Wireless, we've got a tremendous customer relationship. We've got over 100 million consumers. Over 70 million of those customers carry with them high-end video-enabled smartphones. 60% of our network traffic comes from video. And of that 60, it's 2 to 1 YouTube to Netflix. And if customers are going to consume video in that particular quantity on our network, then don't we have an opportunity to enter this, at this low barrier of entry, this crowded space? And don't we have an opportunity to leverage our customer relationships much in the same way as an Apple does or a Facebook does? And the win, and I think as I sit at my desk, I say the winning long-term position, and I think the point was made earlier, and I agree with it. I don't believe that Netflix has what it takes for longevity, because I think the winning position here is that company that creates an ecosystem that leverages the customer relationships and delivers them what they want. So that's what I have here for starters, and that's kind of when I'm sitting at my desk and trying to figure out ways in which Verizon can make more money in the content distribution space and grow beyond the FiOS investment. That's how I see the marketplace. So thank you.
Our last speaker is Blair Levin. Blair's bio is on page 23, not with the rest of the panel. So if you're interested, it's a very interesting background.
Thank you.
Long background.
Other people have done predictions and data. I'm really here to do a thank you and a game theory, as I'll explain in a minute, all around the question of how much bandwidth do we need to unleash next generation video. According to the past and current FCC chairs, a lot more than we currently have or are likely to get. Julius gave a speech on this in January 2013. I don't recommend reading it unless you want to read a totally insipid speech. Tom Wheeler gave a far more important speech a couple weeks ago. But we're not here to do speech analysis. We're actually here to answer the question of how we get that bandwidth. And there's a backstory to both those speeches. In the summer of 2009, we at the National Broadband Plan asked Citi to provide a report on all publicly announced broadband deployment. We were looking at both spectrum issues and wireline issues. And the data was deadly. Now, I don't really mean this in kind of a Middle Eastern way, shall we say. I just mean that in terms of what we were looking for about what was likely to occur, it was very problematic because for the first time since the beginning of the commercial internet, there was no national carrier with plans to deploy a better network than the best available network. And indeed, if you look at it and understood what was going on, you could see a cycle of upgrades, but now it went flat because while we might agree with the previous speaker that Verizon's FiOS investment was successful, it was not successful at that time from a Wall Street perspective, and no other telephone companies were thinking of doing such a thing. Indeed, for 85% of the country, which by the way is the same number that Tom Wheeler used a couple weeks ago, cable had both a faster network and very importantly a cheaper upgrade path, making the financing for telcos of an upgrade very, very difficult. So it looked like the future would be long-term, and I mean long-term kind of toward 2020. Cable versus copper, competition would be premised on allocating scarce bandwidth instead of building on technological advances to deploy abundant bandwidth, which has a lot of different implications. The biggest one being that really if you're allocating the scarce resources that came out of the way we jerry-rigged cable and telco networks that were built for different purposes, you actually would want to cause buffering so that you would have you'd move people to higher tiers. Indeed, if you look at the Time Warner model in Kansas City as opposed to the Google model, Time Warner has 9 different tiers, Google has 2. And the reason is the core value proposition for Time Warner in Kansas City is how do we benefit, how do we get an ROI off of a pre-existing network? So how do we really harvest? Whereas for Google, the core proposition is we're going to future-proof it. We're going to build it once, and we're going to have it for many, many years. And what it allows is quickly, and this is important, quickly scaling up to whatever the demand actually goes, because no one really knows where the demand's going to go, because it's not in the trenching, it's in the electronics. So I'm now going to tell you the story I've never told publicly about how game theory played into our view of this, because as we looked at it, we were trying to figure out what should we do about this. And we started thinking about the prisoner's dilemma. As you know, in the classic prisoner's dilemma, the prisoners are both better off if they trust each other not to confess. The cop's mission in the prisoner's dilemma game is to cause a defection, because that achieves the goal of the cops. Now, if you substitute the idea of investing in next generation networks for confessing and alternatively harvesting sunk costs for staying quiet, what you see is both cable and telcos, as we were looking at the situation in 2009, are both better off if they trust each other not to deploy next generation networks, and they both honor that trust. And that was certainly the situation, I think, that we saw, and one, by the way, completely supported by my dear friends on Wall Street, they well should have. So that creates the regulator's dilemma, how to cause a defection. We thought about isolation booths, torture, things like that. We talked to Dick Cheney, but none of those things work. I will spare you a lot of other things that we worked. I'll simply say the actual recommendation of the broadband plan was kind of bad. It was my fault. But we did have a very interesting discussion with Google that led to something far more productive, which also led, by the way, to Gig.U. So I'll now flash forward to 2014. The Gig.U project, which I started and worked with a number of different cities, we're in the process of doing gigabit projects that go from kind of small streets and zones to a district in Gainesville, to entire cities in Louisville and Champaign-Urbana and Lansing. The Research Triangle Park area, along with the Triad area in North Carolina, struck the deal with AT&T. And last week or actually Monday, announced a deal that, if properly understood, really involves the entire state, but is being led by 3 cities. More importantly, of course, Google has moved forward to announce 34 communities. It's been a really wonderful game watching this. AT&T responded saying, okay, we'll see your 34 and match you with 100. And the game of gigs is on, leading to some very interesting reversals. A year and a half ago, Cox and Time Warner were saying, we're never going to do a gig. Customers don't want it. They don't want that faster speed. It'll cost way too much to do it. And as the game of gigs has played out, both of those companies have reversed positions, for which I do not want to make fun of them or criticize them. The whole point of the game was to change the environment. They were acting totally rationally, and they are now acting rationally again. And that's what's really lovely about this game. So here's where we stand today in the game. The most important part of this chart is on the Google side, and what you see is 2 years ago you had 34 communities that had no prospect of a next generation network, not a single one. Now all 34 communities where Google has announced, the telco has also announced that they have plans to deploy fiber to the premise. And so you now have 2 potential gigabit next generation providers to those 34, as well as a number of other communities. And of course, cable will respond in various different ways. So, so the question is, are we there yet? And the answer is no. We should not be popping champagne. We should not be saying, boy, that was really great, because all of the progress to date is reversible. What we have in some sense is a phony war. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean we haven't seen the changes in CapEx budget. We have actually seen some interesting signs of new, Corning is showing some, I think, new buying for fiber, but not really significant. What's going to happen at the end of this year, next year, and the following years, where you're really going to see the real war either play out or not. But things can change. Google, Larry Page may wake up tomorrow morning and say he wants to do with Google Fiber what he did to Motorola. There could be a number of different changes in market conditions that affect this. And there also could be a change in municipal politics. There are certain people who say this is actually creating a new digital divide and other things. Those arguments, which I find to be kind of silly, actually, very, very misguided. But nonetheless, they have a certain kind of currency, and the idea behind them is not irrelevant. Just the analysis behind them is irrelevant. So that's where we're going with the game of gigs. The idea of policy should be, how do we fuel and extend the game? And let me just close by saying that we put this amusingly together as a way of paying tribute to HBO. Unfortunately, it's not really true. That is to say, it isn't true today that Verizon has to upgrade or die, or any company needs to upgrade or die. I would simply note that for the sake of next generation video, it would really be a good thing if they believed it was true. Thank you very much.
All right, we've had some interesting thoughts, some different thoughts, so maybe we can get... First of all, I'll just quickly ask the panelists, does any of the panelists wish to comment on any of the other panelists' comments, since there was a little bit of agreement and some disagreement? Ben, what do you think of Raul's prediction?
Well, I think that the thesis that Amazon and Apple can come in and destroy another company's business model could be applied to pretty much every business, from online video to automobiles and washing machines. So I think it's one that is easy to throw out. We thought a few years ago, we were big skeptics of Netflix. We felt like they wouldn't be able to get compelling content, and they certainly have. We didn't think they'd be able to create their own content with shows like House of Cards they have. We didn't think they'd get bigger than HBO, and they're bigger than HBO in about 6 years. In fact, they're looking like they might get a lot bigger than HBO. We didn't think they could make money, and they're actually profitable in the US, and they're profitable in the UK and Canada. We didn't think they could go into a market like the UK where Amazon was already there with a product called Love Film and pass them and make money, and they have. And we didn't think they could raise prices and not have a churn issue, and last quarter they reported their subscriber growth was ahead of expectations despite putting in a price increase. So it's one that certainly converted me. I think the ubiquity of broadband coverage gives them an actual scale advantage over other facilities-based distributors of content. And Amazon has failed really in building Prime to anything meaningful so far in the US. The sub numbers, I don't know who the source was for your Amazon data, but those numbers are definitely high. I've heard they have about 5 million people who use instant video in the US versus the 40 million that Netflix is approaching. So whenever you have companies that have zero cost of capital, like Amazon, it's always a little scary when you're competing with them. But at least so far, Netflix has managed to pass everybody else in relatively short order, including guys like Comcast, who had every incentive to sort of do to Netflix what they'd like to do to Google Fiber by sort of spending money and getting ahead of them. So it's a bit of a race to build critical mass. $7 billion of content spending for Netflix, that's certainly a lot of money even for an Apple or a Google. And we thought you'd see a lot more companies over the last few years come in and compete with a subscription video product, and like Apple and Google, and they have not. I think they've run into issues around content costs, bandwidth consumption that they didn't want to deal with. So anyway, I think it's certainly a controversial name. That's why we have markets, buyers and sellers, and we continue to think they've got pretty rosy prospects. So hope I didn't take up all the Q&A time.
Oh, it's okay. I'm just trying to figure out whether I'm buying or selling.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything from the audience at this moment for our illustrious panel? Back here. If you could identify yourself, please.
Sure. Raul Martinick. Maybe a question for Terry. To what extent are carriage deals where content owners bundle multiple channels we now have is impeding kind of a broadband video world where it can be more a la carte, pricing can be more flexible, people can buy exactly what they want?
Yeah, I think the bundled position actually creates a barrier to entry for those who actually want to participate in a more traditional sense. And I think what that has done, and I would argue that that's probably one of Netflix is one of their best friends, is that if Dish wants to get into an over-the-top position, or Verizon wants to get into an over-the-top position, and then we're beholden to the bundling of content, then immediately you start with a wholesale pricing game in which, and I think Ben mentioned it in his remarks, you're underwater. So Netflix can then continue to enjoy their current business model, but eventually I think you're going to see that it's going to unfold in a way that I think is actually more favorable to new entrants who are actually the old entrants like a Verizon, or like a Dish, or like a DirecTV, and I think you'll see a breakthrough here in the next 2 or 3 years.
Can I just add to that I think one of the issues that'll come up in the Comcast Time Warner Cable merger is the extent to which certain contracts that Comcast has should be continued or disallowed. And one of the things that's really interesting and I think very difficult actually to analyze is that all the competitors to Comcast who are saying we'd like to enter the market or we'd like to upgrade, but we can't do it unless we have kind of equal terms to the video package. are kind of on that side of saying we'd like to be able to do this with smaller bundles. I'm not sure where Comcast is on that. In other words, from a competitive perspective, the bigger bundles is working with them, but on an ROI perspective, it's not necessarily working with them. So I think it's how the Justice Department deals with it, or the FCC might have some very unintended consequences vis-a-vis that market.
Anything else from the audience? We're doing fairly well on time, so we'll take and Pepper, and that's it.
Horst started us thinking
You
about...
identify yourself.
Russ Newman, NYU. Horst started us thinking about the issue of cord cutting, and then Ben raised a slightly different definition of cord cutting, meaning dropping the premium part of the cord. But for the cord cutting, which means no cable at all, Mike, the numbers, I'd like the panel to respond. The recent numbers I saw, which was in public data in the New York Times a week ago, was that households served by television has dropped from 98% to 97%. So overall, it's a 1% evidence of cord cutting. But among 20-year-olds, it's 6%. I wondered if the panel might comment on those numbers.
Yeah, just to get the definition squared away. So when we think about cord cutting, we think about dropping pay TV to something else that's either Netflix or no television at all. The data you're citing is literally TV sets in the home dropping out, which is really being replaced by other screens like a laptop or a tablet, which I think makes some sense. So within that, pay TV penetration has been about 80–85%. So about 15 to 20% of America hasn't had pay TV for a long time. And so there's a lot of room within that for people to do different things, take on Netflix. Again, we think there's about 10 million, so call it 8 to 10% of America that have no pay TV but have a broadband connection, which would definitely be probably people like the New York Times data citing who no longer have a TV set because they've got a laptop or a tablet in their home, single people. So I think one of the tricky things here is people are focusing sometimes on the screen, the actual physical screen, rather than the change in spending or change in business model or economics in that household. So going back to cord cutting, which is someone canceling cable and going from paying $100 a month to zero, on a net basis, that data looks to be fairly de minimis. It was negative a couple 100,000, we think, last year. It looks like it'll be closer to zero this year. And going back to Blair's comment on sort of the lower end of the market, Comcast has an Internet Plus package, which is basically a skinny video package, probably $30, plus broadband, and you get HBO as well. And I've heard that they've had a lot of success with that product. They're actually offering it a lot on college campuses, which is you get your broadcast channels, you get HBO Go, and you get broadband connectivity for $40–50 a month, at least for the first year. And I think so, and things like what Dish is trying to do, that they're really trying to address that more economically sensitive cohort in the marketplace. So anyway.
Horst
May I just add one aspect to that? So what happens then, and those data that you cited I think are quite accurate. I think what often happens then is that these data are interpreted as an indicator that the new generation will never embrace these new technologies. And I think there's a confusion between cohort and lifestyle effect. We've seen very, very good research that explored some of the reasons. And I think it's really quite rational for a 22-year-old who is most likely to live in a different location in 3 months than where he or she is now, and so on, not to buy all of this stuff. And we do find that overwhelmingly that they will say that, well, once I'm married and settled down and all that stuff, of course I want to have a huge TV and, watch sports and, In fact, what I thought was fascinating, in one study we found that some young men actually said, well, at first I thought it was not good that I couldn't watch some of the games anymore now because I don't have cable anymore and don't get ESPN. But it's actually great because we have a real good excuse now to get together and get drunk in the bar and watch the game. So there's a real lifestyle factor here that I think is often overlooked, and I think what we're going to see is that there's a lot of reverting to more traditional behaviors once people get, married, have kids, and gain weight.
In the interest of time, Raul, you had something, and then Terry on this question, but if you could make it quick, because
I think that the differences between Ben and I have to do One of them is on the time horizon. I mean, clearly, and as an equity research analyst, you're focused on the short term. Probably I wouldn't disagree with many of the conclusions that you raised on the short term, on this momentum that Netflix has. I'm trying to look at these structurally over the long term, and from that perspective, I think that there are some signs that worry me about the long-term viability, as Terry said. We might be not that sharply opposed. Okay. It's just that we're doing different things.
Okay. Terry, real quickly?
Yeah, I would only add that what you really see here is just it's marketing segment opportunities. So you've got this new group of people, and however it is you categorize them, as Horst did, people who are in life stage, that you can actually market a product to them because of their consumer behavior and the device availability, and that's a nice market because that might be a 20 million, 30 million market. And then Ben's point on sort of coming in and addressing sort of lower price points, actually historically you've always been able to do exactly what Comcast is doing. No one ever marketed it because it would depress your ARPUs, but it's actually by law you have to be able to offer a broadcast basic package and provide a customer to buy their HBOs and their premium services. But we never marketed. Now they are, and we're actually seeing some uptick there.
Bob Pepper, last question.
Yeah, so Ben, a question as part of the money flows. You didn't mention the cost also on retrans paid to broadcaster by cable and post area. So is there the option in terms of the restructuring to do what Chuck Dolan tried to do a while ago and have a non-broadcast tier? In other words, redefine yourself out of broadcast, eliminate retrans as a cost, put together the broadband and skinny cable with a pay package. In other words, to do a completely different type of bundle based upon, again, lifestyles, viewer preferences, and so on. And what does that do? And as part of this, what is the current cost and revenue stream that goes to the broadcasters? Because what you were showing was the decline in the free-to-air viewing, the broadcast viewing, even if you're on a pay package.
Yeah, so there are a lot of things in that question.
So you got to answer one of them, and that'll be it.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say that you were going to need to take on the NAB to get a no broadcast tier. So good luck with that. I think that's a tough fight that's going to ultimately get lost, given the broadcaster power in DC. Blair might disagree with me. I know Chairman Wheeler is really close and friendly with the broadcasting community these days.
Well, I'm not going to disagree and just note what happened to the local choice proposal by Senator Spoon and Rockefeller as Exhibit A.
Isn't that what Bergen is doing with the satellite? There's no broadcast.
Yeah, look, retrans is a hot button item because the numbers are exploding. But even if you look out to 2020, we think all in, adding up the broadcasters, you're probably looking at $8 to $10 worth of cost for a cable company out of a $40 to $50 spend on content for Terry's business, which is painful. Certainly coming from 2 to 8, I'm sure he is not excited about those kind of cost growth rates. However, they represent 40% of all viewing, right? So they're still actually underpaid vis-a-vis the viewership on broadcast television. Now, maybe if this is the official top of the NFL by 2020, that might change. But if the NFL and other broadcast programming continues to be as widely consumed as it has been, it's going to be very difficult to defend them asking for more.